I don't want Eliza. Dawson Hale's voice cut through the parlor like a blade through silk. Every head turned, every breath stopped. I want Lena. Her father's face went white. Her mother's teacup froze mid-air. And Eliza, beautiful chosen, never once doubted Eliza, slowly turned to stare at her older sister, standing in the kitchen doorway, dish towel still in both hands, heart slamming so hard it hurt. 26 years. 26 years of being the afterthought, the shadow, the daughter nobody introduced first, and the most powerful man in the county had just said her name like it was the only name in the room. I don't want Eliza, Dawson Hale said, his voice cutting through the parlor like a whip crack. I want Lena. The room went dead silent. Her father's face drained white. Her sister's jaw dropped. And Lena stood frozen by the kitchen doorway, a dish towel still in her hands, her heart slamming so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. Nobody chose Lena. Nobody ever chose Lena. If you love stories about ordinary women who rise when no one expects them to hit subscribe, drop your city in the comments, and let's see just how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The Hale family had a way of making things clear without ever saying them out loud. It was in the way Margaret Hale set the dinner table. Eliza always got the seat closest to the window, where the evening light caught her golden hair just right. It was in the way their father, Harold Hale, introduced his daughters to visitors. And this is Eliza, our pride. With a proud sweep of his hand, and then almost as an afterthought, a vague gesture toward the back of the room. And Lena. Just Lena. No adjective. No pride. Just the name tossed out like a receipt after a purchase you didn't really want to make. Lena had grown up understanding this. She had not grown up accepting it. There was a difference, and she knew it well. Acceptance would have broken her. Understanding simply made her careful. Careful where she stepped. Careful what she said. Careful not to want things too loudly, because wanting things out loud in the Hale household meant watching your father hand them to Eliza instead. She was 26 years old. She had calluses on her palms from mending fences her father claimed were too hard for women. She had a scar on her left forearm from a barbed wire tangle she'd fixed alone at age 17 because the ranch hand had quit and her father hadn't noticed yet. She could read weather better than most men in the county, and she could birth a calf in a rainstorm with nothing but a lantern and her bare hands. None of that ever made it into her father's introductions. It was a Thursday morning when everything started to come apart. Lena was in the kitchen, the way she always was at that hour earlier than anyone else, because the bread didn't rise on its own, and the coffee didn't brew itself, and someone had to think about the practical things before the day demanded them. She was pulling a pan from the oven when she heard the creak of wagon wheels outside, and then the particular sound her father made when he was trying to be impressive. That deep, cleared throat, chest-out sound that meant company had arrived. Important company. She moved to the window without touching the curtain. It was a habit she'd learned young. Look, but don't be seen looking. Dawson Hale. She recognized him before she saw his face. Recognized the straight-backed way he sat in a saddle. Recognized the gray roan horse he rode. Recognized the unhurried certainty of a man who had never once in his life walked into a room wondering whether he belonged there. Dawson Hale was 31. He owned the largest cattle operation in a 2-county radius. He had built it himself, hadn't inherited it, hadn't married into it, hadn't borrowed his way into it. He had started with 40 head of cattle, a piece of land most people thought was worthless, and what old Clarence Pruitt at the feed store liked to call an unreasonable amount of stubbornness. He was also, and this was the part the women of town discussed at length, the kind of man who didn't seem to notice that he was handsome, which made him considerably more dangerous than men who did. Lena didn't let herself think about that part. She pulled back from the window and set the bread pan on the rack. She heard her father's voice big and booming, "Dawson, come in, come in!" And she heard her mother's quick feet scurrying toward Eliza's room. They were getting Eliza ready. Of course they were. "Eliza, wake up. Dawson Hale is here." Lena heard it clearly through the thin wall between the hallway and the kitchen. She heard her sister's groggy complaint, then the sound of her mother's urgent whisper, and then the specific rustling sound of someone being rushed into a nicer dress. She kept working. She sliced the bread. She set the coffee on the table. She put out the good cups because her mother would notice if she didn't, and she didn't want to hear about it for a week. She straightened the tablecloth, moved the flower arrangement her mother had put out the night before 2 inches to the left so it didn't block the sight line from the head of the table. She worked quietly, efficiently, invisibly, the way she always did. Her father brought Dawson into the dining room 8 minutes later. Lena heard them before she saw them. Her father's voice, big, expansive, performing. Dawson's voice, lower, measured, real. "Finest county in the state, and I'll stand by that," her father was saying. "I won't argue it," Dawson said. Lena stepped back toward the kitchen doorway. Her father saw her. "Ah, Dawson, you know my daughter. Lena." The briefest pause. "She helps around the house." She watched Dawson turn. He didn't look through her. That was the thing she noticed first. The thing that stayed with her later, when she turned it over and over in her mind like a stone with a surprising weight. He didn't look through her the way most men did when they'd already decided which daughter they were there to see. He looked at her. "Morning, Miss Hale," he said. "Morning," she said, and moved back into the kitchen before she could do something foolish, like hold his gaze. Eliza made her entrance 4 minutes later. Lena didn't watch it. She didn't need to. She had watched enough of them to know exactly how it went. The careful pause in the doorway, the soft smile, the slight tilt of the chin that caught the light. Eliza was not unintelligent. She had simply learned, as all of them had, what the household rewarded. She heard her father's pleased voice, her mother's delighted murmur, the scrape of chairs. Then her father's voice, louder, directed toward the kitchen doorway. "Lena, bring the coffee." She brought the coffee. She poured it without making eye contact with anyone, the way a person becomes furniture, and she was already turning back toward the kitchen when Dawson spoke. "Miss Hale, Lena, would you sit down?" The question landed like a stone in still water. She turned around slowly. Her father was staring at Dawson with the polite confusion of a man trying to recalibrate. Her mother's smile had gone slightly fixed. Eliza was looking at Dawson with the first hint of a frown. She has things to see to," her father said smoothly. "The coffee's poured," Dawson said. He wasn't rude about it. He wasn't aggressive. He was simply a man who said things like they were true because in his experience they were. "Miss Lena, please sit." Lena sat. She wasn't sure why. She told herself it was because refusing would have made a scene, and she didn't make scenes. But the honest part of her, the part that lived very quietly behind all the careful and all the invisible, knew it was because something in the way he said, "please," sounded like he actually meant it. The conversation moved the way those conversations did. Her father talked about land, about cattle prices, about the upcoming county fair, and the quality of this season's beef. Eliza offered a few bright, practiced comments and a laugh that arrived exactly when laughs were supposed to arrive. Dawson listened to all of it. He answered the questions he was asked. He was not rude, and he was not impatient, but twice. Twice that Lena counted when her father said something that was slightly overstated or politely untrue. She caught Dawson's eyes, moving briefly, almost imperceptibly toward her, like he was checking her reaction. Like her reaction was the real information in the room. She kept her face still and her hands folded in her lap, and she said nothing, and she did not let herself think about what that meant. It was after breakfast, after her mother had suggested a walk in the garden and taken Eliza to demonstrate her embroidery, that Harold Hale settled into his chair with the particular satisfaction of a man who thought everything was going according to plan. "Well," he said in the voice he used when he thought he was being subtle. "I imagine you can see what we have here, Dawson. A fine girl, a well-raised girl. She'd be a credit to any household." He meant Eliza. Everyone in the room understood he meant Eliza. Dawson set his coffee cup down with precise quietness. "I can see what you have here, Harold," he said. I've actually been able to see it for some time. That's why I wanted to speak with you today." Harold Hale beamed. "About a marriage arrangement," Dawson said. "Though not the one you're thinking of." The beam flickered. "I don't," Harold started. "I want to ask for Lena's hand," Dawson said. The room went dead silent. Lena heard it from the kitchen doorway. She had come back to collect the cups. She had the dish towel in both hands. She was standing 3 feet from the doorway when the words reached her, and she felt them the way you feel a sudden cold gust, not painfully, not pleasantly, but with the full-body shock of something you weren't braced for. "I want to ask for Lena's hand." She stood very still. Her father made a sound she had never heard him make before, a stuttering, recalibrating sound, like a man who had prepared a speech and been handed the wrong occasion. "Lena," he said. Not Eliza. He said it the way you say a word that doesn't look right on the page, like you're not sure you're reading it correctly. You mean Lena?" "I do," Dawson said. "She's the older one," Harold said, as though this explained something. "I'm aware," Dawson said. "Eliza is—" Harold stopped himself, recalibrated again. "Eliza is better suited." "Better suited for what?" Dawson asked. His voice was quiet and entirely serious. "For what exactly, Harold?" Silence. Lena made herself walk into the room. She didn't know why. She only knew that if she stood in that doorway 1 second longer, something in her chest was going to either break or explode, and she was not going to let either of those things happen in a kitchen doorway. She walked in, and she stood beside the table, and she looked at Dawson Hale. "What did you say?" she asked. She needed to hear it again, straight at her, not through a wall. Dawson looked at her directly. That same look, the one that didn't go through her. "I told your father I'd like to speak with you about a marriage arrangement, between you and me." A brief pause. "If you're willing to hear it." "Why?" she said. It was not the polite question. The polite question would have been something softer, something that gave him room to maneuver. But Lena had never been much for polite questions, when real ones were available. "Why?" Dawson repeated, as though turning the word over. "That's a fair thing to ask." "It's the obvious thing to ask," she said. Her father made a sharp sound of displeasure. She didn't look at him. Dawson almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "Could we speak privately?" he asked. Her father objected. Of course he did. But Dawson Hale was a man who owned 4,000 acres and 20 years of good reputation, and Harold Hale was a man who owed money at the bank and had 2 daughters to see settled and in the arithmetic of their county. That meant Harold's objection lasted approximately 45 seconds before he found pressing business on the far end of the porch. They stood in the parlor. Lena kept the dish towel in her hands because she didn't know what else to do with them, and she was not going to twist them together like a woman who was frightened. She was not frightened. She told herself that firmly. She was not frightened. "I've been watching your family for a while," Dawson began. "Most people watch Eliza," Lena said. "I know," he said. "I watched her too early on. She's charming, and she's pretty, and she's been raised to be exactly what she is." He paused. "But I've been watching you." Lena said nothing. She waited. "Last March," he said, "during the storm, the one that came in fast from the northwest before anyone was ready for it." She remembered it. Of course she remembered it. She'd been up until 3 in the morning in the barn, her father asleep, the hired hand gone for the week. "One of our cows had gotten through the fence line," Dawson continued. "She'd wandered close to your property. I went looking for her in the dark, and I found her about 50 yards from your barn." He looked at Lena steadily. "I also found you, knee-deep in mud in the middle of that storm with a lantern in one hand and your arm inside a breech calf that would have died without you." Lena said nothing. "You didn't call for help," he said. "You didn't wait. You just did what needed doing." "The calf needed to be turned," she said, "because that was the plain fact of it." "Most women would have woken someone," he said. Most men would have decided it wasn't worth the trouble in that weather. The calf would have died, she said again. Yeah, Dawson said, and something in his voice shifted. Something quiet and genuine moved through it. That's why I'm here. Tunk. The silence that followed was long enough to be its own kind of conversation. Lena turned the dish towel in her hands once and made herself stop. You want to marry me because I know how to pull a calf. I want to marry you, he said, because when things went wrong and no one was watching, you didn't hesitate. That's not a romantic reason, she said flatly. No, he agreed. It's not, but it's a real one. And I'd rather start with a real reason than a romantic one that evaporates the first hard winter. She looked at him for a long moment. She had expected she didn't know what she had expected. Pity, maybe. Or the particular uncomfortable charity of a man offering something to a woman he felt sorry for. She was looking for it carefully, the way she had learned to look for things in people's faces, the things they didn't say. She didn't find it. What she found instead was a man looking back at her with the same careful attention. My father wants Eliza settled with you, she said. Your father wants the financial security that comes with my name, Dawson said evenly. That doesn't change my question. The town will talk, she said. The town always talks, he said. I find it matters less the less you require from them. Lena let out a breath through her nose. Not quite a laugh. Something adjacent to it. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, he said. I'm not going to tell you it is. You'd know I was lying. He held her gaze. I'm telling you it's worth considering. She didn't answer him that morning. She asked for time and he gave it without pressuring her, without the weighted silence of a man who expected her gratitude in advance. He nodded once, thanked her for hearing him out, and went to find her father. Whatever happened between Dawson and Harold Hale on that porch, Lena didn't witness. She went back to the kitchen, and she stood at the counter for a long moment, with both hands flat on the wood and her eyes on the middle distance, and she breathed in and out slowly, the way she did when she needed to think, without letting her heart think faster than her head. The door opened behind her. It was Eliza. She stood in the kitchen doorway, in her good dress, her hair still carefully arranged from the morning, her expression carrying the particular quality of someone who has overheard something they are trying very hard not to visibly care about. What did he want? Eliza asked. Her voice was light, professionally light. To talk, Lena said. About... Lena looked at her sister. She and Eliza had never been close. Not the way people romanticized about sisters being close, not the way their mother told people they were. They had been raised in the same house under the same roof by the same man's rules, and that had made them careful around each other rather than intimate. But Eliza was not cruel. She had been favored without asking to be favored, and that was not her fault. Lena held on to that the way she held on to most things that were true and uncomfortable firmly without resentment, because resentment was expensive, and she couldn't afford it. We'll talk tonight, Lena said. Eliza studied her for a moment. He didn't... She stopped, rearranged something in her face. He's a good man, she said finally. And whether she meant it as comfort or warning, Lena couldn't entirely tell. I know he is, Lena said. The afternoon wore itself out the way afternoons did. Her father found her twice. The first time he came at her with bluster. What did you say to him? What nonsense was spoken? This is not what was planned. Lena listened without interrupting, which she knew drove him to distraction, and when he wound down she said simply, I didn't say anything to him, Papa, I only listened. Which was true, which somehow made him angrier. The second time he came quieter. That was worse. Harold Hale was a man you knew how to navigate when he was loud. When he went quiet, he was rearranging something in his thinking, and the rearrangements were not always in your favor. He stood in the kitchen door and looked at her in a way she recognized the way he looked at things on the ranch that he was reluctantly reassessing the value of. Dawson Hale, he said. Yes, she said. You know what this would mean for this family. It was not a question about her. It was never a question about her. She noted that without bitterness, noted it the way you note weather, as a fact that affects your plans without being something you caused. "I know what you think it would mean," she said carefully. "Don't be clever with me, Lena." "I'm not being clever, Papa. I'm being accurate." She set down the pot she'd been cleaning and turned to face him fully. He asked. I told him I'd think on it. That's where it is right now. "And what is there to think on?" Harold asked. "A man like Dawson Hale doesn't ask twice." "No," Lena agreed. "I don't imagine he does." Her father looked at her for a long moment. She waited for what usually came next, the reminder of what she owed, the gentle inventory of her limitations, the arithmetic of what she was worth on the open market of county opinion. But something in Harold Hale's face shifted that evening in a way she hadn't seen before. Something moved through his eyes that was almost not quite, but almost respect. He left without saying the rest of it. She stood alone in the kitchen for a long moment after the door closed behind him. Then she picked up the pot and went back to work and let herself very quietly begin to think. She thought about it all evening. She thought about it with her hands occupied, the way she always did, her best thinking doing dishes, folding laundry, banking the fire for the night. She turned it over, the way she turned problems over, looking at it from all sides, checking for the places where the reasoning was soft. He wanted her because she hadn't hesitated in a storm, because she'd done what needed doing when no one was watching, because she was in his estimation someone who could be relied upon. Those were not small things. She knew enough about the world, enough about what women were usually wanted for, to know that those were not small things. But knowing you are valued for real reasons and knowing how to trust that valuation were two different skills, and she wasn't sure she had practiced the second one enough. Her mother found her at the end of the evening, sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of tea. Margaret Hale was not a warm woman, had not been in Lena's memory a woman who found warmth easy. She had her affections, but they ran narrow, and they ran toward Eliza the way water runs toward the lowest ground. She sat down across from Lena and folded her hands on the table. "He's serious," her mother said. "I know," Lena said. "Your father is—" She paused, chose carefully. "Your father sees certain opportunities." "I know that too." Her mother looked at her. "What do you see?" The question surprised her. It was more direct than her mother usually was, more interested in Lena's answer than her mother usually was. She looked across the table at the woman who had raised her to be invisible and wondered, not for the first time, how much of that had been intention and how much had simply been the way the current ran. "I see a man who looked at me like I was actually there," Lena said quietly. Her mother was silent for a moment. "That's more than most women get," she said finally. It was not encouragement. It was not discouragement. It was simply a fact delivered in the flat voice of a woman who had been doing the arithmetic of her own choices for 30 years. "Yes," Lena said. "I know." She made her decision just before midnight. Not in a rush. Not in a fever of emotion. In the same quiet, deliberate way she made all the decisions that mattered alone with clear eyes after she'd looked at the thing from every direction and satisfied herself that she wasn't running toward something out of fear or away from something out of stubbornness. She was not doing this for her father. She was absolutely clear on that. She was not doing this because the county would talk, or because time was running, or because Dawson Hale's acreage made it a practical solution. She was doing this because a man had looked at her in a rainstorm and seen not a burden or an afterthought or a consolation prize, but a person making a decision worth respecting. And she was 26 years old, and she was tired, bone tired, quietly tired of being the one nobody chose. She sat at the kitchen table in the dark, and she made her decision, and then she went to bed, and she slept better than she had in months. In the morning she sent word to Dawson Hale. The message was short. She was not a woman who used 5 words when 2 would do. "I'll hear the rest of what you have to say. LH." His reply came back within the hour, carried by the same boy she'd sent with the note. It was equally short. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. I'll come to you. D.H. She folded the note and put it in her apron pocket and went back to the bread. Her father watched her from across the room with the expression of a man who was trying to decide whether he had won something or lost it. Her sister sat at the breakfast table and said nothing, but her hands were very still around her coffee cup, the specific stillness of someone listening to a room. And Lena. Lena worked her dough with steady hands and let herself feel for the first time, in a very long time, like a woman who was standing exactly where she had decided to stand. Not where she'd been placed, where she had chosen. Yeah. The morning Dawson Hale arrived to speak formally with Lena Hale, the whole ranch seemed to hold its breath because somewhere between the sending of a note and the arrival of an answer, something had shifted in the Hale household that no one could quite name, but everyone could feel. And whatever came next was going to change all of them. Dawson arrived at 10 o'clock exactly. Not 5 minutes early. Not 2 minutes late. Exactly 10. Lena noticed because she was the kind of woman who noticed things like that, and what it told her was that this was a man who did not perform urgency, he didn't feel and did not pretend casualness when he meant something seriously. She met him at the door before her father could get there first. That was intentional. Harold Hale had spent the better part of breakfast trying to position himself as the architect of whatever was about to happen, adjusting his chair, clearing his throat with authority, making small pointed comments about the importance of family consultation and how these things ought to be handled properly. Lena had listened to all of it, finished her coffee, set the cup down, and walked to the front door 30 seconds before the knock came. She opened it herself. Dawson stood on the porch with his hat in his hands, not as a gesture of submission, but the way a man takes his hat off when he's treating something as serious. His eyes found hers immediately. "Miss Hale," he said. "Mr. Hale," she said. "Come in." Behind her, she heard her father's footsteps adjust. They sat in the parlor, Lena across from Dawson, her father installed in the corner armchair, with the energy of a man who had decided he was chaperoning rather than supervising, because chaperoning sounded more dignified. Her mother had taken Eliza somewhere in the house that wasn't this room, and Lena was grateful for that, at least. Dawson spoke plainly. That was something she was learning about him. He didn't wind up to his meaning. He went straight at it. "I want to be clear about what I'm offering and what I'm not," he said. "I'm not offering a fairy story. I'm not going to tell you this will be easy or that the county won't have opinions. They will." He paused. "What I'm offering is a partnership, equal say in decisions that affect the ranch, your name on the deed, your voice in the room when it matters." Lena's father made a sound in his chair. She didn't look at him. "My name on the deed," she repeated. "From the first day," Dawson said. "That's not negotiable on my end." "You've thought about this a long time," she said. "Since March," he said simply. "The storm, the calf. 4 months of watching her from a distance and arriving here with his mind already made up." She turned that over carefully. Some women might have found it unsettling being observed without knowing. She found it instead oddly respectful. He had not acted on a whim. He had waited until he was certain. "I have conditions," she said. Her father's chair creaked sharply. Dawson didn't blink. "Let's hear them." She had thought them through the night before, the way she thought through everything methodically without sentimentality, checking each one for whether it was something she actually needed or something she was demanding out of fear. "I'll run the household on my own terms," she said. "No interference in how I manage the domestic side of things." "Agreed," Dawson said. "If I see something being done wrong on the ranch, I say so, directly, without being told it's not my place." Something moved through his expression, not surprise exactly. More like recognition. "I'd expect nothing less," he said. "And if this doesn't work—" She paused, not because she was uncertain, but because the sentence needed to be said right. "If this becomes something neither of us can live with, I want the ability to say so without being made to feel that I've failed at the only thing a woman is supposed to succeed at." Silence in the room. Her father was very still in his chair now. Dawson looked at her for a long moment. "Lena," he said, first name, no miss. And that landed differently than she expected. "If we ever get to a place where we can't find our way through together, I give you my word, you'll walk away from it with your dignity intact and your name respected. That's a promise." She searched his face for the place where that was performance. She didn't find one. "All right," she said. "Then I accept." Her father came out of his chair like a man who had been sitting on a spring. "Now, just a moment," he started. "Papa." Lena's voice was quiet and perfectly level. "This has been decided." "It has not been." "It has," she said. "You've been sitting in that chair for the last 20 minutes without speaking, and I respected that. Now I'm asking you to do the same." Harold Hale stared at his daughter. In 26 years, she had never spoken to him that way. Not sharply, not cruelly, she hadn't raised her voice, hadn't trembled, hadn't made it a fight. She had simply said the truth of the matter in the same tone she used when she told the ranch hands where to mend the fence line. He sat down. Dawson stood and extended his hand to Lena. Not to her father, not to the room to her, and she stood and took it, and they shook hands the way two people do when they have just agreed on something real. "I'll speak to Reverend Caldwell this week," Dawson said, "unless you'd prefer to wait." "No waiting," Lena said. "If we're doing this, we do it." The corner of his mouth moved. "Good." Word moved through the county the way word always moved, faster than horses, louder than it needed to be, and with the particular creative embellishment that came from being passed through enough mouths. By Thursday afternoon, 3 different versions existed. In the first version, Lena had somehow trapped Dawson Hale into the arrangement through means that were vague but implied. In the second version, Harold Hale had secretly arranged it all along, and Eliza had graciously stepped aside. In the third version, the one circulating among the women at the dry goods store, Dawson had taken one look at Lena Hale and fallen dead silent in the middle of the Hale parlor, which was romantic enough that nobody wanted to examine it too closely. None of these were accurate. All of them were more interesting than the truth, which was simply that a man had watched a woman do a hard thing well and decided that was what he wanted standing beside him for the rest of his life. Lena heard bits of it through the week. She neither confirmed nor corrected. She had learned early and thoroughly that other people's narratives about you run on their own fuel, and the best thing you could do was decline to add to the supply. What she was less prepared for was the visit from Clara Pruitt. Clara Pruitt was 53, sharp-tongued, church-attending, and the closest thing the county had to an official record of everyone's business. She arrived at the Hale house on Friday morning with a basket of preserves and the very specific energy of a woman who had organized a reason to be somewhere. Lena met her at the door, because Lena always met people at the door. Now a small discipline she had adopted since Tuesday, as a way of reminding herself and everyone else that she was no longer the person who hovered in the kitchen waiting to be summoned. "Lena," Clara said, with the particular warmth of someone who was very interested in you. "Mrs. Pruitt," Lena said, "come in." They sat with tea. Clara arranged herself with the basket on her lap and the conversation in her hands. "I'll be direct," Clara said, "because I've always liked you, and I think you deserve directness." She paused. "People are talking." "People were always going to talk," Lena said. "Some of them are saying." Clara chose carefully. "That Dawson Hale has made a mistake. That he's passed over Eliza, who is, and I say this with no unkindness, the more obvious choice." Lena set her teacup down. "The more obvious choice for what?" Clara blinked. "For a man of his standing, his social—" "Clara," Lena said pleasantly, "what is it that you think Dawson Hale needs a wife for?" A pause. "Well," Clara said, "to manage the household, to represent the family to look a particular way at church," Lena said, "to smile at the right dinners, to be a decoration that reflects well on him." She looked at Clara steadily. "Is that what you'd want for your daughter?" Clara opened her mouth and then, to her credit, closed it again. Dawson Hale. Lena continued quietly, runs 4,000 acres. He needs someone who can think on their feet, who doesn't panic in a crisis, and who will tell him the truth when everyone else is telling him what he wants to hear. She picked up her teacup again. I've been doing those things my whole life. I just wasn't doing them for anyone who noticed. Clara Pruitt looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in the older woman's eyes, a reassessment careful and genuine. Well, Clara said after a moment, I suppose that's a different way of looking at it. It's the accurate way, Lena said. Clara left 40 minutes later. Lena was fairly certain the fourth version of the story, a considerably better one, would be circulating by Sunday. The harder conversation came that same evening. Eliza found her on the back porch after supper in the particular quiet that came after the dishes were done, and before anyone had decided what to do with the remainder of the day. She sat down beside Lena without asking which was the most direct thing Eliza had done in as long as Lena could remember. They sat in silence for a moment. Are you angry? Lena asked. It seemed important to ask it straight. I don't know, Eliza said. Which was, Lena thought, probably the most honest thing her sister had said to her in years. I don't think I wanted him specifically. I don't think I thought about it that hard. He was just... She paused. He was just the plan. Papa's plan, Lena said. Yes, Eliza admitted. Papa's plan. She was quiet for a moment. Was there a part of you that wanted to say no, just to refuse it on principle, because you hate that it was his idea first? Lena thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. For about 4 minutes. Eliza made a sound that was almost a laugh. What happened after 4 minutes? I thought about the alternative, Lena said. Another year in this kitchen. Another season watching Papa try to arrange things and nothing changing. She paused. And I thought about the way Dawson Hale looks at me. Eliza was quiet. He doesn't look at me like I'm a solution to a problem, Lena said. He looks at me like I'm a person who solved one. She glanced at her sister. That might sound like a small thing. It doesn't, Eliza said quietly. It sounds like the only thing. They sat together on the back porch until the light went fully out of the sky, and for the first time in as long as Lena could remember, the silence between them felt like something shared rather than something maintained. 5 days before the wedding, Dawson's ranch foreman, a broad, weathered man named Garrett Cole, came to the Hale property on an errand that was clearly pretextual. He stood in the yard and talked to Lena for 20 minutes about hay prices, which neither of them cared about, and then finally arrived at the thing he had actually come to say. Some of the men aren't sure what to make of this, he said, not unkindly, with the directness of someone who thought she deserved to know the truth of her situation before she walked into it. Which men? She asked. The ones who've worked the Hale ranch for years, Garrett said. They respect Dawson. They trust his judgment. But they're adjusting to the idea of a woman having weight in the decisions. Lena looked at him steadily. Are you one of them? He held her gaze for a moment. I was, he said. Past tense. What changed it? Heard what you said to Clara Pruitt, he said, and then after a pause. And I was the one who found that breech calf alive in March. Didn't know who'd done it until recently. Lena said nothing. That calf is 300 pounds now and the healthiest animal on the property, Garrett said. Just thought you should know. He touched the brim of his hat and left. Lena stood in the yard after he was gone and felt something loosen in her chest. Something she hadn't quite known was wound tight. 2 days before the wedding, Harold Hale tried one last time. He came to her room, knocked, which he had not done since she was a child, and stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands, which was so unlike him that she knew immediately it was serious. I owe you an apology, he said. The words landed strangely. She had not expected them. She waited. I prepared you for the wrong life, he said. His voice was flat in the way voices get when a person is trying to say something true without letting the emotion of it embarrass them. I raised you to be useful, and I raised Eliza to be chosen, and I thought that was practical, sensible. He stopped. I was wrong. Lena looked at her father. He was 61 years old, and he looked in this moment every bit of it. Dawson Hale chose you, he said. Not because I arranged it, not because the numbers added up. He chose you because of who you are. A long pause. I should have been the first one to see that. The room was very quiet. She could have said many things. She had a whole inventory of them accumulated over 26 years, every time she'd been the afterthought. Every introduction where her name had come second, every morning, she'd gotten up before anyone and gone to bed after everyone, and been thanked for none of it. She looked at her father, and she chose instead the one thing that was actually useful. Come to the wedding, Papa, she said. Stand up straight, and look like you meant it all along. Harold Hale let out a long breath. His shoulders, which had been very straight in the way of a man making a difficult speech, came down slightly. I can do that, he said. Good, she said. Then that's what we'll do. The night before the wedding, she couldn't sleep. Not from fear. She had checked for fear carefully, and it wasn't there, not in any significant quantity. It was something else, something more difficult to name. A species of wonder, maybe. The specific disorientation of a woman who had arranged herself over many years to expect very little suddenly standing at the edge of something large. She lay in the dark, and she went over it all again. The morning and the storm. The parlor. The conditions she'd laid out, and the way he'd met them without flinching. Garrett Cole and the 300-pound calf. Eliza on the back porch. Her father in the doorway with his hat in his hands. The way Dawson Hale said her name like it was the name he had meant to say all along. She was not a woman who talked herself into things. She was a woman who checked the ground carefully before she put her weight on it. And she had checked this ground from every angle she knew how to check. It held. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow the whole county is going to be watching. And then, with a quietness that surprised her, let them watch. The morning of the wedding arrived with the particular clarity that mornings have when something is about to change in a way that cannot be changed back. Lena dressed without fuss. She had never been a woman who made much of ceremony for its own sake. But she took her time because she understood that today was the day the world was going to see her differently, and she wanted to be sure she was seeing herself clearly first. She stood in front of the mirror in the good dress her mother had altered. Her mother had done it quietly without being asked 2 nights ago. Taken it in at the waist and let it out at the shoulders, because Lena was broader there than fashion usually accounted for, broader from years of work that fashion didn't usually celebrate. She looked at herself. For the first time in a long time, she looked at herself without immediately looking away. A knock at her door. "They're ready," her mother said. Lena straightened her shoulders, the way she straightened them when she was about to do something that required her full attention. Then she opened the door and walked out to meet what came next. The parlor was full. More people had come than she expected. Not just family, but neighbors. A collection of county faces that had assembled with the particular energy of people who had heard there was something worth seeing. She felt their eyes as she walked through the room, felt the specific weight of collective attention that she had spent most of her life avoiding. She walked through it without stopping. Dawson was standing at the far end of the room with Reverend Caldwell and Garrett Cole beside him. He saw her when she came through the doorway, and something in his face, in that steady, measured face that gave nothing away, that it hadn't decided to give, went briefly entirely unguarded. She held that. Just for a moment. She held it like something precious. Then she walked to stand beside him, and Reverend Caldwell opened his Bible, and the room went quiet, and Lena Hale took what was hers. Reverend Caldwell had performed 11 weddings in the past 3 years, and he would later tell his wife that he had never once felt a room hold its breath the way it did that morning in the Hale parlor. He opened with the standard words, The ones everyone knew, the ones that had been said over enough couples in this county that they carried the accumulated weight of all those other mornings, all those other promises. But something in this room was different, and even a man as practiced as Caldwell could feel it. The attention in the room was not the soft, sentimental attention of a wedding crowd. It was sharper than that, more alert. The kind of attention a room gives when it suspects something is about to happen that it will be talking about for years. Lena stood straight. Dawson stood straight. Neither of them looked at the crowd. They looked at each other, and the room looked at them, and Reverend Caldwell kept his voice steady and moved through the words with the particular care of a man who understands that he is not the center of what is happening. Harold Hale stood in the second row with his chin up the way Lena had asked him to, looking like a man who had planned this from the beginning. Margaret Hale had her hands folded and her eyes bright, and whether those were tears of sentiment or relief or something more complicated, she kept them to herself. Eliza stood at her mother's side and addressed the color of a winter sky, and she watched her sister with an expression that had moved over the course of the week from something complicated into something that was very close to quiet pride. Garrett Cole stood to Dawson's left and watched the room the way a man watches a room when he's decided which side of a thing he's on. Clara Pruitt was in the back row, hands folded, taking in every detail with the thoroughness of a woman who knew she would be reporting extensively. "Do you, Dawson Hale, take this woman?" "I do," Dawson said, not waiting for the end of the sentence. Clear and immediate the way he said everything that he meant. A small sound moved through the room. Not quite a murmur. More like the collective adjustment of 20 people simultaneously revising what they had expected this morning to be. Caldwell continued without missing a beat, because he was a professional. "And do you, Lena Hale, take this man to have, and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" The room went so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Lena looked at Dawson. He was looking back at her with the same expression he had worn in the parlor the morning he'd first said her name, like it was the name he meant steady, real, entirely present. "I do," she said, and she meant every syllable of it in a way she hadn't known she was capable of meaning things until this week had taught her she was. "Then by the authority vested in me," Caldwell said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." He paused, the practiced pause of a man allowing the moment its weight. "You may kiss your bride." This was the moment. Later, Lena would not be able to say with any precision what she had expected. Something brief and formal, probably. A closed-mouth acknowledgement of the ceremony. The kind of kiss that said, "This is done without saying anything more complicated than that." That was the sensible expectation, given that she and Dawson Hale had known each other for a matter of weeks, had shaken hands more than they had touched, had conducted their entire courtship with the practical directness of two people building something, rather than two people falling into something. That was what she expected. What happened was different. Dawson turned to her fully not the half-turn of a man managing an obligation, and he raised his hand and set it against the side of her face, and it was the gentleness of it that undid her. This man who handled cattle and barbed wire and land disputes with the same contained force touching the side of her face, like she was something he had been waiting a long time to be careful with. She felt herself lean into it before she'd made the decision to. The kiss was not brief. It was not indecent. It was not a spectacle. It was the kind of kiss that happens between two people when they have both quietly and separately been bracing for something good and then been surprised by it anyway. It lasted long enough that the room knew it was real. Long enough that Reverend Caldwell found a renewed interest in his Bible. Long enough that Clara Pruitt stopped breathing for 4 full seconds. When it ended, neither of them moved immediately. They stood close, and Dawson kept his hand against her face, and Lena kept her eyes closed for 1 moment longer than necessary, and the room was perfectly, absolutely stunned silent. Then Harold Hale started to clap. It was a startled clap. The clap of a man who began applauding before he had fully decided to, and it was the most genuine thing Harold Hale had done in a parlor in years. The sound broke the spell, and then everyone was clapping, and someone in the back let out a long breath that had the quality of a laugh, and Clara Pruitt made a sound that was purely involuntary. Lena opened her eyes. Dawson was looking at her. "Well," he said quietly, so only she could hear it. "That went differently than I planned." "Did you plan it?" she asked. "I planned to be appropriate," he said. "What happened?" He looked at her for a moment, with that almost smile she was beginning to recognize as his truest expression. "You happened," he said simply. The reception was held at the Hale property Margaret had insisted on, that one of the few things she had insisted upon, and Lena had conceded it without argument because it cost her nothing and meant something to her mother. Tables in the yard, food that half the neighboring women had contributed without being asked, because that was what you did in a county like this when a wedding happened, regardless of what you thought about the particulars. People came who had not been at the ceremony. Word had moved fast. Lena watched them arrive with the slightly suspended disbelief of a woman who had spent 26 years as peripheral and was now inexplicably the center. She handled it the way she handled unfamiliar terrain carefully, without performing either confidence she didn't feel or discomfort she did. She stood beside Dawson and she shook hands, and she received congratulations, and she smiled at the right moments, and did not smile at the wrong ones. And if some of the guests had arrived expecting to witness something awkward, and left having witnessed something that made them rethink their assumptions, she noted that with quiet satisfaction. The first real test came 20 minutes into the reception. His name was Robert Aldous. He owned the property that bordered the south side of Dawson's ranch, and he had for the better part of 3 years been engaged in a dispute with Dawson over a water access question that had not yet been settled to anyone's satisfaction. He was 60, heavy-handed in conversation, and he carried himself with the specific confidence of a man who had never once in his life had to adjust to someone else's position. He came to Lena. Not to Dawson, to Lena. She understood immediately that this was intentional. He had calculated in the way that men like Aldous calculated that the new wife was the soft approach. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hale," he said, with a smile that had the temperature of a December well. "Quite a morning." "Thank you, Mr. Aldous," she said pleasantly. "I imagine you'll be getting settled in over at the Hale Ranch now," he said. "Finding your feet. It's a fine property. Fine." He paused. "Though I imagine Dawson will have a lot on his mind adjusting to married life. A man gets distracted." She looked at him. "I thought," he said with the casualness of a man sliding a card across a table, "that perhaps now might be a good time to revisit the water access question. Fresh start and all. New chapter. You thought," Lena said, "that today would be a good time to approach me about a property dispute. Just a friendly—" "At my wedding reception," she said. He blinked. "Mr. Aldous," she said in the same even tone she used when she was explaining something to someone who should have understood it already. "I don't know the full details of the water access question yet. I will by the end of this month because I intend to learn everything about that property from the deed to the fence line. And when I do, if there is a legitimate conversation to be had, my husband and I will have it with you at an appropriate time and place." She smiled precisely as warmly as the situation required, and no warmer. "Today is not that time. This is not that place." Aldous stared at her. "Enjoy the food," she said. "Margaret Hale made the pie herself, and it is extraordinary." She turned away from him and found Dawson 3 feet behind her, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. He had heard all of it. She could tell from the look on his face, a look she hadn't seen from him yet. Something new. Something that was admiration and amusement in equal measure. He handed her a glass. "You know about the Aldous dispute," he said. "Garrett mentioned the broad strokes," she said. "When?" "Tuesday." Dawson absorbed this. "You've been preparing." "I prepare for everything," she said. "You knew that already." He looked at her for a moment, the same way he'd looked at her in the parlor that first morning, like she was information he was still processing and finding more substantial than expected. "I did know that," he said. I just didn't know how far it went. You'll find out, she said. Clara Pruitt found her next, which was inevitable. Lena, she said, taking her arm with the familiarity of a woman who had decided they were now allies. I want you to know that what you said to Robert Aldous just now will be halfway across the county by Monday. I imagine so, Lena said. I'm saying that as a good thing, Clara said firmly. That man has been riding roughshod over everyone who lets him, and nobody has spoken to him that plainly, since Martha Holloway in 1987, and she's been dead 8 years. She patted Lena's arm. You're going to be very interesting to have in this county, Mrs. Hale. That's a kind thing to say, Lena said. It's an accurate thing to say, Clara said, and then she smiled, a real one, nothing careful about it. Now go find your husband before he's cornered by the Mitchells. They've been waiting to talk to him about the county road petition, and this is not the day. The day wore on the way good days do, too quickly, with too many things happening in the margins to fully catch. Lena found herself moving through it with a kind of focused attention she recognized as the same attention she brought to anything that mattered, the same attention that had kept a calf alive in a March storm while everyone else was asleep. She caught moments of Dawson across the crowd, talking to his foreman, laughing at something Garrett said, shaking hands with a rancher from the North property. Each time she found him in the crowd, he was already looking at her, and she had the specific experience of being in a room full of people and feeling for the first time genuinely accompanied. The twist she had not anticipated came in the late afternoon. No. It was Eliza who found her, pulling her quietly away from a conversation with two of the neighboring wives, steering her toward the back of the house with the focused intention of someone who has been waiting all day to say something and has finally run out of patience with not saying it. I need to tell you something, Eliza said. Her face was different, stripped of the careful management she usually kept in place. Tell me, Lena said. Papa had a conversation with Dawson, Eliza said, 3 weeks ago, before you gave your answer. She paused. I wasn't supposed to hear it. I heard it. Lena waited. Papa told Dawson that he was making a mistake, Eliza said. He told him you were difficult, stubborn, that you had ideas above your station, that you'd be more trouble than you were worth. She met Lena's eyes. He told him that if he reconsidered, the arrangement with me was still available. The yard noise continued around them, distant and unreal. Dawson said something back, Eliza said, and this is the part I've been thinking about every day since. What did he say? Lena asked. Eliza's voice dropped. He said, Harold, every single thing you just described is exactly why I want her. A woman without stubbornness breaks in the first hard season. A woman with ideas built this county alongside the men who got the credit for it. And if you think difficulty is a flaw, it's because you've been surrounded by easy things your whole life, and none of them have lasted. The silence between them was full. Then he left, Eliza said. And you know the rest. Lena stood very still. She was doing the thing she did when something hit her squarely in the center, holding perfectly still while the wave moved through, because she had learned that was more efficient than trying to brace against it. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Because you needed to know what kind of man you married, Eliza said simply. And because... She paused, something moving through her face that was complicated and honest and real. I needed to say it out loud to someone. I needed to stop carrying it. Lena looked at her sister. Then she did something she hadn't done in longer than she could precisely remember. She pulled Eliza in and held on, and Eliza held back. And for a moment, the gap of all those years of careful distance between them collapsed into something that was finally real. You're going to be all right, Lena said, quiet and certain. I know, Eliza said. I think you finally will be too. She found Dawson at the edge of the yard later, after the crowd had thinned and the late light was doing the particular thing it did when a day was almost over, turning everything a color that made it look more significant than it was, or maybe exactly as significant as it actually was. She stood beside him. He looked over at her. Something in her face, she supposed, gave away that she'd learned something. He was good at reading her better than she'd expected him to be this quickly. "Eliza told you," he said. "It wasn't a question." "She told me," Lena said. A pause. "I meant it," he said. "I know," she said. "That's the part I'm dealing with." He turned to face her, and there was something in his expression she hadn't seen all day, something unguarded in the way the kiss had been unguarded, something that existed prior to calculation. "Are you all right?" She stopped, started again. "I have spent 26 years being managed, handled, positioned. And then you told my father 3 weeks before I said yes that the things he considered my defects were the reasons you wanted me." She looked at him. "That is an enormous thing to absorb, Dawson." "I know," he said. "I'm not sure I have the words for what that—" "You don't need to find them today," he said quietly. "We have time." She looked at him. This man who had watched her in a rainstorm, who had waited 4 months, who had sat across from her and met every condition without flinching, and then gone home and defended her to her own father without telling her. "We have time," she repeated. "All the time you need," he said. She took a long breath and let it out slowly, and she turned to stand beside him again, and they looked out across the yard together at the last of the guests. The scattered cups and plates, the tables that had held a day, she was still making sense of. "I want to see the ranch tomorrow," she said. "First thing," he said. "All of it. The full acreage. Every problem, every dispute, every note in your ledger. I'll have Garrett pull everything. And I want to understand the Aldous situation completely before the end of the week," she said. Dawson was quiet for a moment. "You're not going to take a single day, are you?" "I'm not a single-day person," she said. "No," he said, and something in his voice was so warm and so certain that it moved through her like the first heat of a fire on a cold morning. "You're really not." She didn't say anything back. She didn't need to. She stood beside her husband in the last light of their wedding day, in the full weight of everything that had just changed, and she felt not happiness exactly, or not only happiness, she felt solid. She felt like a woman standing on ground that was finally, after 26 years, actually hers. The county had watched her all day. Let them keep watching, she thought. They hadn't seen anything yet. Garrett had the ledgers pulled by 7 the next morning. Lena was already at the table when he brought them in, coffee in hand, the same early rising discipline she had carried from the Hale kitchen into this new house without even thinking about it. Dawson came in 10 minutes later, saw her with the first ledger open and a pencil in her hand, and did not say a word. He poured his coffee, sat down across from her, and pulled the second ledger toward himself, and they worked in silence for 40 minutes while the ranch came awake around them. That was how the first morning of their marriage began. Not with softness. Not with the tentative circling quality of two strangers trying to find their footing. With work side by side, which was Lena was beginning to understand the most natural language they had between them. She found the first problem in the third ledger. "This water lease," she said without looking up, "the one with the Aldous property." "Ongoing," Dawson said. "I can see that. What I'm looking at is the original agreement." She turned the ledger to face him and set her finger on a line. "This language here. Seasonal access defined as April through September. Who negotiated this?" Dawson looked at it. "My father, before he passed it to me." "Your father negotiated seasonal access to water on a cattle ranch," she said. Not accusatory. Genuinely trying to understand the reasoning. "The dispute was smaller then," Dawson said. "The herd was smaller, but the language was never updated when the herd grew." A pause. "No," he said. "So Aldous has been leveraging the vagueness of seasonal ever since." Dawson set his coffee down. "He's been arguing that October access constitutes a violation of the original terms." "It doesn't," Lena said. "It constitutes an oversight in drafting that he's choosing to interpret in his favor." She looked up. "You need a lawyer to rewrite this language before next spring, not to fight Aldous to make the fight irrelevant." Dawson looked at her for a moment. I had a lawyer look at this 2 years ago. What did he say? That it was complicated. What he meant, Lena said, was that he didn't want to bill you for a prolonged dispute when a simple redraft would resolve it cleanly. She pulled the ledger back. I'll write out the specific language that needs to change. You bring it to the lawyer and tell him exactly what you need. Don't ask for his opinion on strategy. Give him the outcome and ask him to build the path. Dawson was quiet for a moment, that had the quality of a man recalibrating. You've dealt with lawyers before, he asked. I've watched my father deal with lawyers badly for 20 years, she said. It's an education. Good. By the end of the first week, Lena had moved through every ledger spoken with Garrett twice more about the eastern fence line situation, identified a feed supplier overcharging by 12% on a standing order that had apparently never been reviewed, and learned the name of every man on the property. Every name. She had gone to the trouble of finding each one out specifically because she had been managed by people who didn't know her name, and she understood exactly what that communicated about how much you mattered. The men noticed. They didn't say anything directly. They were not men who said things directly when observation would do, but she felt the shift. The way Garrett started directing small questions to her when Dawson was occupied. The way the morning reports began, including information she hadn't asked for, but clearly needed. The way the newest hand, a young man named Pete, who couldn't have been more than 19, started saying good morning to her with the same instinctive deference he gave Dawson. She did not let it make her careless. She knew the difference between being accepted and being tested, and she understood that in a world where everyone was watching to see if she would break, the only credible response was to simply not break. The moment she hadn't anticipated came at the end of the second week. It was a Tuesday, and Dawson had ridden out before dawn to deal with a fence breach on the north property, taking Garrett and 2 of the hands with him. Lena had expected a quiet morning. She was halfway through reviewing the feed accounts when she heard hooves in the yard, too many too fast, and then Pete's voice pitched high with urgency. She was at the door before she'd made the decision to move. 3 men on horseback. She didn't recognize 2 of them. The third was Robert Aldous. He was not at the yard for a social call. She could read that immediately in the set of his shoulders, in the way he remained on his horse, rather than dismounting, which was the posture of a man who wants to conduct his business from a position of height. Mrs. Hale, he said, with the satisfaction of a man who has timed something carefully. I was hoping to speak with your husband. My husband is on the north property, she said. Is there something I can help you with? This is a business matter, he said. I'm aware of all the business matters on this property, she said. Try me. Aldous looked at her with the expression of a man deciding how seriously to take an obstacle. He made his calculation visibly the way certain kinds of men do when they believe the person in front of them doesn't notice it. We've had cattle on the creek bed again, he said. Hale cattle, on my side of the line. How many head? She asked. Doesn't matter how many. It matters to the conversation we're having, she said. How many head? A beat. 4, he said. 4 animals drifted through a fence, she said. When? This morning. Then they drifted through a fence that was intact yesterday and has since broken, she said. That's a maintenance issue, not a trespass. She looked at him evenly. Pete. The young hand straightened. Go find out which section of the north fence has come down and get a crew on it before noon. Then back to Aldous. The animals will be returned before end of day. If there was any damage to your property, bring me a written accounting and I'll review it. This isn't the first time, Aldous started. No, it isn't, she said. It's also not the crisis you're treating it as. 4 animals through a broken fence line is a fence problem. We'll fix the fence. She held his gaze. If you have a legitimate grievance that goes beyond this morning, make an appointment and we'll sit down with the water lease documentation and the property surveys and we'll address it properly. She paused. But I won't be managed in my own yard, Mr. Aldous. Not by anyone. The silence stretched. One of the men behind Aldous shifted in his saddle. Aldous sat very still, doing the recalculation that men of his type did when the conversation did not proceed as planned. Then he turned his horse and left. Pete let out a long breath beside her. "Ma'am," he said with the specific reverence of someone who has just watched something they will be describing to people for years. "Go find that fence," she said. Dawson came home that evening to a yard where the fence crew had already returned and filed their report, 4 cattle that were back on their correct side of the property line, and a dinner that was on the table at 6 o'clock. She told him about Aldous while they ate, plainly in sequence, without editorializing. When she finished, Dawson put his fork down. He had the expression of a man who is doing several calculations simultaneously. "He came when he knew I was gone," he said. "Yes. He thought you'd be easier." "Yes." A pause. "Was he ever going to be right about that?" "No," she said simply. Dawson picked his fork back up. Something moved through his face that was deep and quiet and real. "I'll speak to a lawyer about the lease this week," he said. "Your language the way you wrote it out, word for word." "Good," she said. They finished dinner, and then they washed up side by side, and Dawson said without preamble, the way he said things he meant, "I didn't know what I was getting exactly. When I made that decision, I had good reasons and I was certain of them, but I didn't know the full scope of it." She looked at him. "What I mean," he said, "is that I thought I was marrying a capable woman." He paused. "I didn't account for the fact that capable doesn't cover it. Not even close." She held the moment, turned it over, and then said, "You're doing it again." "What?" "Saying the true thing," she said, "when you could say something easier." The corner of his mouth moved. "It's a habit." "Keep it," she said. The twist that neither of them saw coming arrived on a Thursday afternoon in the form of a letter. Garrett brought it to Lena because Dawson was occupied, and the return address was from a legal office in the county seat. And Garrett had developed over the past 2 weeks the specific instinct of a man who has decided that certain things should go directly to Lena Hale. She opened it. She read it twice. Then she set it down on the table and sat very still for 30 seconds, the way she did when something had hit her in the place she kept things she hadn't fully armored. The letter was from a lawyer representing Harold Hale. Her father was contesting the terms of Dawson's marriage arrangement. Not the marriage itself, a smarter legal move than that, but the deed transfer. The clause that put Lena's name on the property from the first day. Harold Hale was claiming that the arrangement had been made under conditions that constituted undue pressure on him as the family patriarch, and he was requesting a review of the property settlement terms. In plain language, her father wanted her name off the deed. She sat with that for a full minute. Then she stood folded, the letter precisely put it in her apron pocket, and went to find Dawson. She found him at the corral with Garrett, and she waited until Garrett had moved off before she handed him the letter. She watched his face as he read it. She had not known him long enough to have seen him genuinely angry yet. She was seeing it now. It moved through him in a controlled way, the way everything moved through him, contained directed like pressure behind a dam rather than water over a bank. His jaw tightened. His hand holding the letter went very still. "He signed the agreement," Dawson said. His voice was flat and quiet in the way of something that is neither. "He did," Lena said. "His signature is on the deed." "Yes." "This won't hold," Dawson said. "Legally, this doesn't have ground to stand on." "I know," Lena said. "That's not what concerns me." He looked up from the letter. "What concerns me," she said, "is that my father is willing to go to a legal office and put his name on a document designed to take mine off a deed." She held his gaze. "I need to know how you want to handle this. Not legally, I know how we handle it legally. I mean," she stopped, chose carefully. "I need to know if you're going to let this become a fight between you and my father that I stand on the side of, or if we're going to handle it together." Dawson folded the letter and held it for a moment. "I'm going to the county seat tomorrow," he said. "You're coming with me." "To the lawyer," she said. To Harold, he said. First, she blinked. That was not what she had expected. We're going to sit down with your father, Dawson said, and I'm going to give him one opportunity to withdraw this before I respond to it legally. One conversation. You present. Your terms, your voice in the room. He looked at her. This is your family, and your name on that deed. You don't stand on the side of this. You're at the center of it. She looked at him for a long moment. You keep doing that, she said. What? Positioning me at the center, she said, when most men would manage me to the edge. Most men, he said, are managing the wrong thing. The meeting with Harold Hale was the most uncomfortable hour Lena had spent since the wedding, and that was including the 40 minutes with Robert Aldous. Her father sat across the parlor table with the rigid posture of a man who is committed to a position and is now obliged to defend it. His lawyer, a small, careful man named Birch, sat beside him with papers arranged precisely the physical performance of legitimacy. Dawson sat to Lena's left. He said almost nothing in the first 15 minutes. He let Harold speak, let him lay out the argument, let Birch interject with the legal framing, and he sat with the relaxed attention of a man who is learning, not reacting. Lena watched her father. She had spent 26 years watching Harold Hale, and she could read him the way she could read, Weather knew the signs of what was coming before it arrived. And what she saw beneath the posture and the lawyer and the prepared language was a man who was frightened. Not angry. Frightened. She waited until Birch finished his second recitation of the grounds for review, and then she spoke. Papa, she said. Harold stopped. What are you actually afraid of? She asked. The room shifted. Birch opened his mouth. Lena looked at him briefly, and he closed it. I'm not, Harold started. You signed that agreement, she said. You stood at my wedding and you applauded. You looked Dawson Hale in the eye and shook his hand. She kept her voice level, kept it free of accusation. So this is not about the deed. The deed is the thing you picked up because it was available. What are you actually afraid of? The silence stretched long enough to be its own kind of answer. You're going to leave us entirely, Harold said, finally, quietly. The lawyer disappeared from his face, and her father appeared instead. You're going to be Lena Hale now, and you're going to have that property and that life, and you're not going to... He stopped. You're my daughter. Lena sat with that. She had not expected it. She had prepared for many things walking into this room. His stubbornness, his calculation, the defensive logic of a man who had made a bad decision and was trying to reverse it. She had not prepared for this, for the raw and undignified truth of a father who was afraid of losing his daughter to the life he had always failed to give her. Papa, she said, and her voice was gentler than it had been. I was never going to stop being your daughter. That was never part of this. Harold looked at his hands. But I am also Lena Hale now, she said. And my name on that deed is not a threat to this family. It's the first time in my life that my name has meant something in a room. I need you to let me have that. The silence this time was different, not defensive. Something in it had given way, Dawson said quietly. Harold, my wife's name stays on the deed. But you have our word, my word, and Lena's word that this family is not being left behind. He paused. That's not a negotiation. That's a promise. Harold Hale looked at his son-in-law. He looked at his daughter. Then he looked at Birch and said, Pack your papers. Dad. They drove back to the ranch in the low afternoon light, side by side, the county moving past them in the comfortable silence of two people who have just been through something together and don't need to immediately make language out of it. After a while, Dawson said, You saw it before I did, that it was fear. I've been reading him my whole life, she said. That's not a small thing, he said. Being able to see the real thing underneath what people are performing. It kept me safe, she said. For a long time it was the only thing that did. He was quiet for a moment. You don't have to use it that way anymore, he said. The reading of rooms and people, you can use it for better things now. She looked at him. I already am, she said. The horses moved. The land moved around them wide and particular and real, and Lena sat in the seat beside her husband and felt with the same precision she felt everything that she had checked carefully and found true, that she was exactly where she had chosen to be, doing exactly what she was built to do, with a man who saw all of it clearly and called it good. She thought of the kitchen in her father's house, the window she had watched from without touching the curtain. The years of careful and invisible. She did not miss them. But she understood now why they had been necessary. Everything she had built in that quiet, the patience, the reading of rooms, the ability to stand in an uncomfortable silence without reaching for something easier, had brought her to this day, this seat, this life. Nothing had been wasted, not a single year of it. The lawyer rewrote the water lease language in 11 days. Lena had given him exactly what she wanted. Not a suggestion, not a framework. The precise language clause by clause that would close every gap Robert Aldous had been exploiting for 3 years. The lawyer, a methodical man named Carver, who charged by the hour and was therefore accustomed to clients who talked too much, read through her draft. In silence, looked up once and said, "Where did you study?" "I didn't," she said. He looked back at the document. "You should have," he said, and billed them for 2 hours instead of 4 because, as he put it, she had done half his work for him. Dawson signed the revised lease on a Wednesday. Aldous received his copy on Friday. He did not respond immediately, which was itself a response. The silence of a man who has opened a document recognized that the ground has shifted beneath him and is deciding how to stand on the new terrain. Lena gave him a week. Then she wrote him a letter herself. Not Dawson's name at the bottom, hers. Short, direct, the way she did everything that mattered. She acknowledged the history of the dispute, stated that the revised language resolved the ambiguity that had generated it, and invited him to a meeting at the Hale Ranch the following Tuesday to establish a working relationship going forward. She signed it Lena Hale, in handwriting that did not apologize for taking up space. Dawson read it before she sealed it. He handed it back without changing a word. "You're not going to suggest anything?" she asked. "It's your letter," he said. "It says exactly what needs saying." She sealed it and sent it. Aldous came on Tuesday. He came alone, which was the first signal a man who brings his associates to a meeting is a man who wants witnesses to his strength. A man who comes alone is a man who has decided to negotiate. He sat across the table from Lena and Dawson in the ranch office, and he looked at the revised lease documents laid out between them, and he was quiet for a long moment. "Your father-in-law's lawyer drafted this?" he asked Dawson. "No," Dawson said. "My wife drafted it." Aldous looked at Lena. She met his gaze with the same steadiness she had given him in the yard 3 weeks ago. She had learned a long time ago that men like Aldous interpreted composure as weakness until they encountered it repeatedly and in high-stakes rooms, and then they began to interpret it as something else entirely. "The October Access Clause," Aldous said finally. "You've defined it specifically." "We've defined everything specifically," she said. "That's the point. If I sign this, you'll have clarity," she said, "which is what you've claimed to want all along." She paused. "And so will we." He looked at the document for another long moment. Then he picked up the pen. He signed it without another word. Garrett, standing in the doorway, exhaled quietly. Dawson said nothing, but she felt him beside her, the specific quality of his stillness when he was absorbing something he considered significant. After Aldous left, Garrett said, 3 years. That man has been a problem for 3 years. He was a problem that hadn't been solved properly, Lena said. There's a difference. Garrett looked at her with the expression she had come to recognize from him, the particular look of a man who keeps finding that his revised estimate of a person needs revising again upward. "Yes, ma'am," he said. The second month of their marriage was different from the first in a way Lena hadn't fully anticipated. The first month had been motion problem after problem presenting itself. Decision after decision demanded the urgent business of establishing herself in a new world that was watching to see whether she would hold. She had held. She had done it with both hands, and her full attention, and the bone-deep stubbornness her father had once considered a liability. The second month slowed down enough for other things to come forward. Things she had not made room for in the rush of proving herself. Things that lived in smaller moments, the way Dawson moved through the kitchen in the early morning quiet and unhurried, always making 2 cups of coffee and setting hers at her left hand without asking if she wanted it. The way he listened when she talked, not waiting for his turn, not managing the conversation toward a conclusion he'd already reached, but actually listening with the full attention of a man who considered what other people said to be worth hearing. The way he sometimes looked at her from across a room with an expression that she had no efficient category for something that lived between pride and wonder and something more private than either. She was not a woman who had practiced being looked at that way. She was learning. One evening in the 6th week, they sat on the porch after supper, a habit they had settled into without deciding to the way certain habits form when 2 people fit the same space comfortably, and Dawson said without preamble, "Tell me something I don't know about you." She looked at him. "What kind of something?" "Any kind," he said. She thought about it honestly. "When I was 14, she said, I taught myself to read a cattle ledger because my father kept them locked, and I wanted to know why." She paused. "Took me 3 weeks to get the lock open without leaving marks. Another 2 to make sense of the numbers." Dawson was quiet for a moment. "What did you find?" "That he wasn't as successful as he told people," she said, "and that he knew it and was afraid of it, and that was why he was so determined to arrange things rather than build them." She looked at her hands. "I never told him I knew. But after that, I understood why he was the way he was, and understanding it made it easier to carry." The silence that followed was warm. 14, Dawson said. "I was a curious child," she said. "You were a remarkable child," he said quietly. "And nobody told you." She didn't answer that. She didn't need to. She sat with it instead, the way she was learning to sit with things he said that moved through her, not deflecting them, not minimizing them, just letting them land where they were aimed and acknowledging that they hit. "Your turn," she said. "Something I don't know." He was quiet for a moment. "I almost didn't come to your father's house that morning," he said. She turned to look at him. "I'd had the conversation with myself about it for 2 weeks," he said. "I knew what I wanted to do. I also knew it was not the conventional move. I knew people would say I'd lost my mind, or felt sorry for you, or—" He stopped. "I sat on my horse at the end of your property road for 10 minutes before I turned up the drive." "What made you turn?" she asked. "I thought about the calf," he said. "I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be. The kind who does the conventional thing because it's easier, or the kind who rides toward what he actually believes is right." He looked at her. 10 minutes, he said. "Then I rode." She looked back at the dark yard and felt something move through her that was too big and too quiet to name properly. "I'm glad you ride fast," she said. He made a sound that was the fullest laugh she had heard from him, yet unexpected and real, and it was the best sound she had heard in a very long time. The twist that shook the county came on a Thursday morning in their 8th week, and it arrived in the form of a wagon from the Hale property. Eliza was in it. Not visiting. Eliza with 2 cases and a trunk, and the expression of a woman who has made a decision and is done renegotiating it with herself. Lena was at the door when the wagon stopped. "What happened?" she asked. "Papa found a new arrangement," Eliza said. Her voice was steady, but only just. "A man named Connolly, from up near the ridge. He's 54, and he's been widowed twice, and Papa says the match is practical." Lena felt the anger come up fast and clean. "Eliza, I said no," Eliza said. And then, with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally set it down. "I said no, Lena. For the first time in my life, I said no to him, and I meant it, and now I need somewhere to be while I figure out what comes next." Lena stepped back from the door. "Get inside," she said. Dawson came in from the field 2 hours later to find Eliza at the kitchen table with tea, Lena across from her, and the specific quality of silence in the room that told him this was a conversation that had already done its heaviest work. He looked at Lena. She looked back at him with the slight lift of her chin that had become in 8 weeks their shorthand for, "I'll explain later, trust me now." He looked at Eliza. "Miss Hale," he said, "you're welcome here as long as you need." Eliza looked at him with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for a condition that wasn't coming. When it didn't come, something in her face changed, something released. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded, poured himself coffee, and took it out to the porch to give them their room. Lena watched him go and felt something in her chest do the thing it did now when she watched him make a decision that was purely decent and asked for nothing in return. She had not had a word for it in the first weeks. She had one now, though she was still learning to say it even to herself. She turned back to her sister. "You're going to be all right," she said. "You said that at the wedding," Eliza said. "I meant it then," Lena said. "I mean it more now. You said no, Eliza. Do you understand what that means? That's yours. Nobody can take that back." Eliza looked at her hands. "It's terrifying," she said. "Yes," Lena agreed. "It is, and it's also the most important thing you've ever done." She reached across the table and set her hand over her sister's. The terrifying part gets smaller. The important part doesn't. Harold Hale arrived the following morning. He drove himself, which was unusual enough that Garrett came to find Lena before Harold had reached the door, giving her 30 seconds to compose herself and decide how to stand. She stood at the front door. Harold looked older than he had at the wedding. Not dramatically, not the sudden aging of a man who has suffered something catastrophic, but the quiet erosion of a man who has been awake at night, examining decisions he made in daylight. "Eliza's here," he said. "She is," Lena said. "I want to speak with her." "She knows that," Lena said. "She'll speak with you when she's ready." She held his gaze. "That's her decision, Papa. Not mine, and not yours." Harold looked at her. The yard was still. Behind him, his horse waited with the patience of an animal that has learned not to anticipate. "I pushed too hard," he said. "Yes," she said. Simply without softening it, because he didn't need it softened, and she was done providing cushioning for truths that needed to land clean. Connolly was, "I thought it was practical." "Practical for who?" she asked. He stopped. "Every decision you've made about us has been practical for you, Papa," she said. "I'm not saying that to wound you. I'm saying it because you need to hear it, and because you're standing on my property, asking to speak to my sister, and the least I can do is be honest with you." She paused. "Eliza is here. She is safe." She said no to something that would have made her miserable, and she needs time to understand what comes next. "When she's ready to see you, I'll bring you a message." Harold Hale stood on his daughter's porch and said nothing for a long moment. Then, "You're different here." "I'm the same," she said. "You're just seeing me differently." He absorbed that. He turned it over the way a man turns over something he suspects is true and isn't sure he's ready to accept. "Your mother wants to know if you'll both come for Sunday dinner," he said. An offering, small, imperfect, the only kind he knew how to make. "We'll come," she said. "Dawson, too." He nodded once. Then he got back in his wagon and drove away, and Lena stood at the door until the sound of it faded, and she breathed in and out slowly, and she let herself feel all of it without closing any of it off, the anger and the ache, and the complicated love of a daughter, for a father who had failed her in ways he was only beginning to understand. She felt a hand at the small of her back. Dawson. Standing just behind her, having come out of the house quietly, not to intervene, but to be there. She didn't turn around. She just leaned back slightly into his presence. "Sunday dinner," she said. "I heard," he said. "It's going to be uncomfortable." "Most things worth doing are," he said. She turned then and looked at him, and she said for the first time, not as a calculation or a conclusion, but as a thing that simply came out of her because it was true and present, and she was done waiting for the right moment. I love you. The words landed in the still morning air. Dawson looked at her with the expression she had been cataloging for 8 weeks, all its variations, all its qualities, and this version of it was one she hadn't seen yet. Something that was past the almost smile, something that was open in a way his face rarely allowed itself to be. "Lena," he said. "Don't make a speech about it," she said quickly. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm just telling you the truth." "I know," he said. "I'm not going to make a speech." He took her face in both hands the way he had at the ceremony, with that same gentleness that still undid her every time. "I love you," he said. "I've known it since about the 4th day. I've been waiting for you to be ready to hear it." She stared at him. "The 4th day. You reorganized the ledger system on day 3 and told me my filing was sentimental rather than functional," he said. "I knew on day 4. She let out a sound that was a laugh, and something more than a laugh. "That is not romantic." "It's true," he said. "I told you I prefer true." She shook her head, and he was smiling now, really smiling fully, with nothing held back, and she reached up and took hold of his wrists where his hands were against her face, and she held on, and the morning held them both, and nothing needed to be added to it. The Sunday dinner was exactly as uncomfortable as she had predicted, and exactly as necessary. Harold sat at the head of his table with the careful dignity of a man rehearsing a version of himself he was not yet fully comfortable wearing. Margaret served with the focused industry of a woman keeping the surface of things smooth. Eliza was quiet at first, careful the way she had been her whole life, and then slowly across the course of the meal, something in her began to ease. She spoke. She offered an opinion without hedging it. She pushed back gently on something her father said, and Harold received it with a silence that was not dismissive, but genuinely ruminant. Dawson talked with Harold about cattle prices and the county road petition and 3 other neutral safe subjects, and did it with the easy competence of a man who knows exactly how to hold a room at a comfortable temperature. Lena watched him do it and felt the particular warmth of seeing someone you love be exactly who they are in a situation that required all of it. After dinner, she and Harold stood alone in the kitchen for a few minutes, while the others moved to the porch. "He's good to you," Harold said. "Not a question." "He is," she said. "Better than I." He stopped. "Yes," she said quietly. "But you're trying now, Papa. That counts." He looked at his daughter, really looked at her with the specific attention of a man who is trying to see something he spent a long time not looking at directly. "I don't know how to say what I want to say," he admitted. "You don't have to say it today," she said. "We have time." He nodded. Something in his shoulders came down. They joined the others on the porch, and the evening moved forward, and it was not perfect. It was not the warm, uncomplicated family ease of people who had never hurt each other, but it was real, and it was theirs, and real was always worth more than perfect. 3 months after the wedding, Eliza found her footing. It did not come in the form Lena might have predicted. Not a dramatic announcement, not a sudden reversal of fortune. It came quietly the way most real things came, in the form of a position managing accounts for the county's largest dry goods store, offered by the owner's wife, who had heard enough versions of the story by then to have formed a strong opinion about the Hale women. Eliza came to tell Lena on a Tuesday afternoon. She sat across the kitchen table, the same table where she had sat with her tea on the day she arrived with her 2 cases, and she looked different. Not dramatically, just the specific difference of a person who has begun to arrange themselves around something they chose rather than something they were assigned. "It's not what I was raised for," Eliza said. "No," Lena agreed. "It's mine, though," Eliza said. "The first thing that's actually mine." Lena felt the echo of that so sharply, she had to take a breath. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what it is." They sat together over coffee, and Lena thought about the back porch at their father's house, the evening they had talked in the dark before the wedding, and how much had moved since then. how much had broken open and rearranged itself into something neither of them could have drawn a map to from where they started. The moment that would stay with her longest came on a quiet evening in the 4th month. Not a dramatic moment. Not a crisis resolved or a confrontation won. Just the end of a long working day. The two of them on the porch, the ranch settled around them. Everything accounted for, in the way it was accounted for now, properly. Completely with both their names on everything that mattered. Garrett had told them that morning that the Aldous dispute was completely resolved, the revised lease signed, and filed the relationship between the two properties the most functional it had been in a decade. The feed supplier had been replaced with a better contract, saving them 14% annually. The eastern fence line was solid. The herd was healthy. 3 of the hands who had been uncertain about Lena in the first weeks had become, in Garrett's word, convinced, which coming from Garrett was the same as saying they would follow her into a burning barn. Pete, the 19-year-old, had told Garrett last week that Mrs. Hale was the best boss he'd ever worked for, and then turned crimson when Garrett had mentioned it at dinner. Lena had filed that away with the other things she was learning to hold the evidence of a life that was actually hers, actually built, actually real. On the porch that evening, Dawson said, "Garrett wants to know if you'll take the lead on the spring purchasing decisions." She looked at him. "He wants to know, or you decided, and you're attributing it to Garrett." He paused. "Both," he admitted. She almost smiled. "Yes," she said. "I'll take the lead." "I thought so," he said. "You could have asked me directly." "I could have," he said. "I wanted to see if you'd catch it." "I always catch it," she said. "I know," he said with the warmth that lived in his voice when he said things he had been thinking for a while. "That's one of my favorite things about you." She looked at him, at this man who had ridden toward her on a gray roan horse, when most men were riding toward her sister, who had sat across from her and met every condition she set without flinching, who had defended her to her own father. In words she had only learned about weeks later, who had said, "I love you" on day 4, and waited until she was ready to hear it. She thought about the kitchen window, the curtain she had watched from without touching, the years of being careful and quiet and positioned at the edge of every room she'd walked into. She thought about the rainstorm and the calf and the lantern in her hand and the specific feeling of doing what needed doing when no one was watching. She had been doing that her whole life. She just hadn't known until now that someone had been watching all along and that it had led her here to this porch, this life, this man, this version of herself that she had been building in the quiet of all those invisible years without knowing what she was building it for. "Dawson," she said. "Yeah," he said, already looking at her. "I want you to know something," she said. "Not because it needs saying for any particular reason, just because it's true and I believe in saying true things." "Tell me," he said. "I am exactly where I want to be," she said. "Not where I ended up, not where things worked out, where I want to be." She held his gaze. "There's a difference, and I need you to know I know it." Dawson was quiet for a moment, the good quiet, the kind that meant something was landing exactly where it was aimed. Then he reached over and took her hand, the way he did it now, without ceremony or announcement, because it was simply what he did when they were in the same space, and the day was winding down, and the world was manageable, and theirs. "I know," he said. "So am I." They sat together on the porch of the Hale Ranch as the last of the light left the sky. Two people who had chosen each other across every obstacle that stood between the choosing and the having, and the land around them was quiet and the herd was settled, and somewhere in the county Clara Pruitt was telling someone the 4th version of the story, the true one, the one that made people sit up a little straighter, and inside the house a name was on a deed that could not be removed, and it was a name that had always deserved to be there, and now it was. One kiss had started it. Not the kiss of a fairy story, not the kind that solved everything in a moment of magic. The kiss of two people who had looked at each other and decided that what was real between them was worth the weight of everything that stood against it. And it had been. And it was. And Lena Hale stood in her own life, finally completely with both feet on ground she had chosen, and she did not look back.